Greetings, my lovelies. This is Blake here, and welcome to my review of Project Almanac. This was a movie I really did not want to see. Nothing about it appealed to my tastes. In fact, I wish something more relevant was being released, like either Seventh Son or Jupiter Ascending, both of which are coming out next week, because then I wouldn't have had to see Project Almanac, and then I could just spread out what I'm going to watch. So preferably I would have seen Seventh Son or Jupiter Ascending yesterday, and then I could see the other one next week, but now I'll have to go to the theaters twice next week, and that never makes me too happy. I'm too much of a cheapskate, especially considering I doubt either movie will be good, but at least they're the kinds of movies I prefer watching in theaters. But Project Almanac, it's a found footage flick, but even worse than that, it's not even a horror movie. I'm not a big fan of found footage, but it complements the horror genre pretty well. So if it's done right, then that first-person point of view can, create a feeling of authenticity, which will, increase tension, make the events even more frightening. But for other genres, it just seems unnecessary, like a cheap way to make money. Now, Chronicle was the exception, but Chronicle was a good movie simply because it was a good movie. The found footage element was nicely executed, but even there, it wasn't that necessary. They could have easily made just as strong of a film without it. But even worse than the fact that Project Almanac was a non-horror found footage flick was that it's been on the shelf for quite some time. It was supposed to be released like a year ago, which means I probably saw trailers for this back in 2013. That is never a good sign. It's not the kiss of death. There have been films that have suffered many delays, like I really liked Trick or Treat, and I hear All the Boys Love Mandy Lane was pretty good. And those films just had issues finding distributors. But I didn't really know the backstory behind Project Almanac. I knew they changed the title, but I wasn't sure if it had reshoots, failed test screenings, if the higher ups had no faith in it, or whether it just had an issue finding a distributor. But still, that was just adding to my disinterest. So I was quite dismayed when I realized that unfortunately I was going to have to settle for this. Why don't I just see American Sniper or Selma or some of the good movies that have been released this year? Because I'm stupid that way. But now that I've seen the film, I didn't think it was bad, but it's not very good either. The sad thing is Project Almanac actually had a pretty good first act. When it introduces us to the characters, I thought it did a good job at establishing their various personalities, so you felt like you knew who these people were just based on the opening scene, and that's not easy to do. But they were all pretty likable. I thought the cast had good chemistry together, nice comedic timing. I thought the main guy was believable as somebody who was brilliant, but at the same time, that wasn't the extent of his characterization. There was a lot more to him, and I thought, the actor did a really good job at, showing these different emotions and different sides to him. And I thought the trial and error experiments they had as they tried building this time machine were compelling. It was entertaining to watch these guys succeed and fail, and I was totally into the movie for the first 30 minutes or so. But unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, this is not a positive review. I want to emphasize that even though I'm praising the first act of this movie, I didn't think it was great. It was just pretty good, much better than what I was expecting. Acceptable, but not exceptional. But the most important thing here is that it still had me. Unfortunately, once they succeed in building the time machine, it slowly starts to deflate until eventually it runs out of air completely. So at first I was taken aback by how small in scale everything was. When you consider, so much potential this story has because it's dealing with time travel. But instead of doing something, inspired and ambitious, it's irrelevant shit like going back in time in order to pass a test they previously failed, or getting revenge on a bully. And they spend an awful amount of time doing this. It's not just like one real quick moment. Nah, they keep going back, and it's drawn out to where it comprises almost the entirety of the first half of the second act. Now, at least they do the thing where they win the lottery, but that's something you expect from all of these movies. So that was disappointing. I felt that it could have been more epic, but despite its lack of ambition, I could tolerate it because, once again, I liked the characters. They provided some funny reactions to these various scenarios, and so even though it was going downhill, it hadn't totally lost me. And then the concert happens, and that's when the film started putting me to sleep. It's just gratuitous padding. Granted, they use that scene to advance the love story, but the love story itself is pretty superficial. It's one of those things where they're trying to sell it as, deep and meaningful, when in reality the guy is just physically attracted to the girl who's attracted to his brain. That's one thing I didn't like too, is she's the weak link in terms of the characterizations, because she just doesn't seem like a very good person, but the film never really calls her out on it. She seems kind of careless and shallow, but I could tolerate her for the most part, but the only times when she stands out is when she's being kind of unlikable, whereas with everybody else they were much more endearing. But generally what this concert scene is the characters partying, having a good time, dancing around. There's no substance to it. There's nothing clever with the dialogue. They aren't given really any opportunity to have, fun reactions to what is going on, even though they are having fun. And it goes on for so long that I started to drift off, and I was like, oh God, this is still going on. Like 20 minutes later, it seems like. It's probably more like 5 minutes, but it seemed like it was at least 10 to 15 minutes. And the film just completely lost me, and it could never really regain its past momentum, even when it had already been kind of disappointing me. Now, what pisses me off is that there were some story threads that I thought the film was going to pursue, but it doesn't. I guess they were red herrings. The first one, and this may have been more on me, but when they go back in time for the first time, could have worded that better. They get chased by a dog. And then once the timeline corrects itself and they're back in the present, the dog is with them, but it's suddenly passive and even friendly. So I was wondering if animals can sense when there's a glitch in the system, when there's something off, and that's why it was acting so hostile. So maybe there was something to that. Maybe that would come to play later on. That was just foreshadowing something bigger. But they never bring it up again, so that was a total waste of time. But once again, maybe that was more on me. Maybe I was looking too deeply into that. But then you have the whole situation with the father. Now, part of the film's backstory is the father gets a phone call and has to leave this birthday party, and he seems kind of intense and rattled, so obviously it was a very important phone call, implied to have something to do with this time machine. But then he gets in a car accident and dies. And when they're talking about this, even the main character says he doesn't really know the details. So immediately, you're thinking there's a conspiracy, that he was murdered. And this is going to become important later on. It never does. They never return to that. So it's an unresolved story thread. And you're wondering, why introduce that in the first place? I would have been much more interested in a storyline that dealt with that mystery than spending 10-15 minutes dancing around at this party. This movie is having fun, too much fun, to the point where it's now killing off the suspense. And yet they're still building to something, big and terrifying. I don't know why I thought the line where it's like, the bits where they're talking about what they want to do before the world ends. I was wondering if that was maybe leading into something crazy and awesome. But even though the finale, it picks up a bit, there are some suspense moments. There is a little bit of tension, but it felt kind of short and anticlimactic. The entire second half of this movie should have been dedicated to when things go wrong, to where they start feeling the consequences of their actions. Instead, it's just the last third of the movie, if even that. It may actually have been the last fourth. The last third, I'd probably say that's where things start to go wrong, but it's just the characters becoming concerned, whereas the last fourth is when, it gets really intense, or at least by the film standards. But even then, like, it wasn't a bad finale, but because I had been so bored previously from that concert sequence, it could just never totally get my interest back again. So, yeah, I was disappointed. It could have gone so much farther with this, and it could have been an exceptional film because, much like Chronicle, it had a good start, but unlike Chronicle, it could never maintain its momentum, so it got pretty boring fast. Would I recommend it? Sure, to a point. I'd probably say wait till it comes out on Netflix or on TV, or maybe even on demand, or if you want to go to the video store to rent it. If you're interested at all in what this movie is offering, if you don't care, then I wouldn't bother. But like, it's not as bad as I was expecting, but it's not really good enough to pursue either. And because the film let itself down with a weak second act and a okay third, but not as good as the first act, it really heightens the feelings of disappointment. So that's all I have to say. I did not do a written review. I have done written reviews of Dragon Eyes with Jean-Claude Van Damme, Jersey Shore Shark Attack, a sci-fi original. I'm sure I've done something else too. Bait, an Australian killer shark movie. So go to my website, read all of those. I'm not sure what my next written review will be. It'll probably be a re-review of Slash Dreams, but it could be a review of the Japanese movie House. So we'll just have to see. Follow me on Facebook and Twitter, and I hope you enjoyed this video, and I shall see you guys later.